My name is Anna, and for the longest time, my life was all about chemistry and work. After high school, I threw myself into university, studying to become a chemical engineer. Then it was straight to the lab, developing new polymer compounds. My personal life? Didn't even make the to-do list. It was work, more work, and, well, you get it. Then, one unexpected night, everything shifted. I didn't even want to go to that party. It was one of those "you have to come, Anna" situations where my friend Jenna practically dragged me out the door. "It'll be fun," she said. I doubted that, but I went. At the party, Jenna was in her element, chatting up everyone. Then she grabs this guy by the arm and pulls him over to where I was nursing my drink in silence. "Anna, meet Tom," she said, a little too enthusiastically for my liking. "Tom, this is the genius chemist friend I was telling you about." Tom looked a bit taken aback, his eyes wide as he took me in. "Hi," he said, his voice uncertain. "Jenna's told me quite a lot about you." "Good things, I hope," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "Yeah, very impressive," he managed, though it sounded like he was talking about a scary movie, not a person. We somehow stumbled through the initial awkwardness and found a quiet corner. Turns out, Tom worked as a manager at a trading company and was a lot more down to earth than our rocky start suggested. He confessed later that night that he'd been intimidated at first, thinking I was too smart for someone like him. That made me laugh. It was refreshing, really. We started seeing each other, and a year flew by. I was surprised at how serious we'd gotten, considering how I used to dodge anything personal, like a chemical spill. Then came the day I met his family. His mom was a sweetheart, welcoming me with open arms. But his sister, Laura? A different story. Right from the start, she looked at me like I was a problem she hadn't figured out how to solve yet. During dinner, I tried to make conversation, asking her about her interests. She just smirked and said, "So, you're the chemist? You cook up stuff in the lab, and now you're here to cook my brother's brain?" I was taken aback, but managed a weak smile. I prefer to think I enlighten minds rather than cook them. Ethan, trying to cut the tension, jumped in. "Laura's always been protective of me," he explained. "She's not easy to win over, but don't take it personally." As if on cue, Laura leaned over and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "No one's good enough for my brother, remember that." Despite Laura's cold reception, Ethan and I got engaged and planned a modest wedding. On our wedding day, Laura's attitude was even more brazen. She rolled her eyes during our vows, snickered during the speeches, and complained loudly about the food and decorations. A couple of months had passed since Ethan and I said our vows. Just as we were settling into our new life, his mother, Mrs. Johnson, took a bad turn. Her illness baffled the doctors, no one could pinpoint what was wrong. She was confined to her bed, her body partially paralyzed, plagued by severe headaches and kidney pain. Ethan suggested that I move into their family home to help care for her, and given my fond relationship with his mother, I agreed without hesitation. From day one, the reality of our situation hit hard. Mrs. Johnson was in a bad way, rarely leaving her bed, and I took on much of the caregiving alongside Ethan. I bathed her, helped her change, and gently combed her hair, which, distressingly, came out in clumps more often than not. One evening, while Ethan was downstairs sorting through some bills, I broached a delicate subject with him in the kitchen. "Ethan, your mom's condition is worsening. Don't you think a nursing home with professional care might be better for her?" I suggested, hoping he'd see the sense in it. Ethan rubbed his forehead, the weight of the world seeming to press down on him. "I know, Anna, I know it's bad. But Laura, she's adamant about keeping Mom here. She says a nursing home would just make things worse." I sighed, my hands clenching in frustration. "But isn't it worse for her to suffer here without proper medical care?" Before Ethan could reply, Laura walked into the kitchen. Her presence was always like a storm brewing. "I heard that, Anna. You think you know better than us? My mother stays where she is," she snapped, her eyes flashing angrily. Realizing this wasn't a battle I could win today, I backed down. "Okay, Laura. I didn't mean to upset you. I just hate seeing her like this. After Laura left, Ethan whispered a tired apology. I'm sorry. Laura's been through a lot. You know, with her husband passing and everything. She's not herself. Yeah, I get it, I replied, though I felt a bitter edge to my words. But it's not just about what she wants. It's about what's right for your mom. Ethan nodded, looking equally torn. I know. Let's just give it some more time. Maybe she'll come around. Time passed slowly after that conversation. Days turned into weeks. I spent hours by Mrs. Johnson's side, watching her struggle with every passing day. Her room became a world unto itself, filled with the sounds of her labored breathing and the soft hum of the medical equipment that seemed to multiply with each week. Laura's resistance, Ethan's indecision, and the daily sight of Mrs. Johnson's suffering weighed heavily on my heart. Moving in here, I had hoped to make things better, to be a part of the family in every way that counted. But as each day passed, I felt more like an outsider fighting an unwinnable battle, clinging to the hope that somehow, someway, I could make a difference in this house that had become my home. Living with Ethan's family was proving to be more of a challenge than I'd ever expected. My relationship with Laura was especially tense. She always found something to criticize about me, and it didn't help that Ethan rarely stood up for me in these conflicts. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen trying to prepare a meal that Mrs. Johnson could easily swallow. Ethan was at work, and I was alone, which was becoming more and more my preference, given Laura's frequent, harsh visits. As I was mashing potatoes, the back door slammed. I didn't need to turn around to know Laura had entered. Making a mess as usual, I see, Laura's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. I kept my focus on the task at hand, my grip tightening on the masher. I'm making dinner for your mom. She needs something easy to eat. Laura scoffed, leaning against the counter and watching me like a hawk. You think you're some kind of saint, don't you? Always hovering, always playing the devoted daughter-in-law. Makes me sick. I placed the bowl down with a little more force than necessary. I'm not trying to be a saint, Laura. I'm trying to help. Oh, cut the crap, Anna. We both know you're just waiting for her to kick the bucket. Playing the grieving widow ahead of time, are we? Laura snapped, her eyes gleaming with something spiteful. It was another regular Sunday dinner when the tension hit a new high. Laura had just breezed into the dining room, fashionably late as usual, wearing a bright red dress. As we sat down to eat, Laura started right in, like she was waiting just for that moment. Really, Anna, must you always work so late? It's like you don't care about being a part of this family at all. I kept my eyes on my plate, trying to stay calm. I do my best, Laura. My work demands a lot. Unlike you, who doesn't even know what it's like to work. Ethan, who had been silent up until then, finally spoke, though not in my defense. Anna, please remember Laura is going through a lot right now with her husband's recent passing. Try to be a little more understanding. His words felt like a betrayal. I shot back before I could stop myself. Maybe if she dressed more like a widow rather than going to a party, I could take her grief a bit more seriously. The table went silent. Ethan's expression hardened. Anna, that's uncalled for. But it's true. I couldn't hold back. She criticizes everything I do, but barely looks in on her own mother. How is that fair? Laura slammed her fork down, standing abruptly. How dare you judge my grieving process? You have no idea what I'm going through. Ethan rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated. Anna, can we talk about this later? Please, let's just finish dinner. I nodded, tight-lipped, and we ate the rest of the meal in uncomfortable silence. After dinner, I tried to clear the air with Ethan, but it was clear his patience was wearing thin. Anna, I know it's hard, but you have to try harder with Laura. She's my sister. She's family. And what am I? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You're my wife, and I love you, but Laura's been in my life a lot longer. You two need to sort this out. I felt alone, truly alone, even though Ethan was right there. It seemed like no matter what I did, it would never be enough for Laura, or, it seemed, for Ethan. 2 months had passed in a blur of daily routines and silent meals until the day we lost Mrs. Johnson. Her death was both a shock and a sorrow that gripped the household, pulling us all into a deep, somber state. Ethan was devastated, his grief palpable and heavy. At the funeral, under a dreary, cloud-filled sky, the tension that had been simmering between me and Laura finally boiled over. As people quietly murmured their condolences, Laura cornered me by the old oak near her mother's grave. "This is your fault, you know," Laura hissed, her eyes sharp and accusing. "If you had cared for her properly, she'd still be here." I felt a flash of anger, but I kept my voice steady. "Laura, I did everything I could. She needed professional care, more than what we could give at home." "Excuses, just excuses," Laura snapped back, her voice low but fierce. "You just didn't want the burden, did you?" I tried to keep calm, but her words stung. "That's not true, and you know it. I cared for your mother every day." Laura scoffed, shaking her head before storming off. The days that followed were filled with quiet mourning. I tried to give Ethan the space to grieve, but the house felt colder, emptier. While tidying up Mrs. Johnson's room one afternoon, I stumbled upon some old medical documents tucked away in her desk. Curiosity got the better of me, and I began to read through them. According to the files, Mrs. Johnson had been in excellent health just a year ago, but her condition had deteriorated rapidly, leading to the failure of several organs all at once. Later that evening, I brought it up with Ethan. "It's odd, isn't it? Her health declined so suddenly. And it says here multiple organ failure was the cause." Ethan, still looking tired and worn from the days of grieving, nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's strange. The same thing happened to Laura's husband. He also had multiple organ failures." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered something from my chemistry classes. "Ethan, both your mom and Laura's husband had severe hair loss before they passed, right?" He looked up, puzzled by the direction of my question. "Yes, that's right. Why?" I hesitated, the implications swirling in my head. "It's just, severe hair loss can sometimes be a sign of thallium poisoning." "It's a stretch, but..." Ethan cut me off, his voice a mix of disbelief and irritation. "Let's not go down that road. It's been tough enough without adding wild theories into the mix." I nodded, agreeing outwardly, while inwardly I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling the coincidence gave me. But I knew better than to push it further. Ethan was already on edge, and my accusations, or even suspicions, could drive a wedge too deep to remove. It started like any other morning, except for the moment I ran my hands through my hair and felt a clump come away with my fingers. Staring at the strands in horror, my mind raced. I knew something was terribly wrong. Frantically, I headed to the lab at work, my heart pounding as I ran tests on myself, a procedure I was all too familiar with but never thought I'd use in such a personal emergency. The results were as chilling as my suspicions, traces of thallium in my bloodstream. Rushing home, I confronted Ethan, my voice trembling with fear and urgency. "Ethan, I found thallium in my blood. Someone is trying to poison me." Ethan stared at me, his expression morphing from confusion to disbelief. "You're being paranoid, Anna. You're seeing conspiracies where there aren't any." Before I could argue, Laura walked into the room, having overheard our conversation. "Oh, please. You work in a lab, Anna. For all we know, you could have brought that poison home yourself. Maybe you poisoned Mom," she snapped, her voice dripping with accusation. I was aghast, the room spinning around me as her words sank in. Ethan's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. "I can't do this anymore, Anna. You're too dangerous to be around. I want a divorce." My world crumbled in an instant. Laura smirked triumphantly. "You heard him. Get out of our house." Numb and heartbroken, I packed my belongings, the weight of their betrayal crushing me. Sitting amidst the unpacked boxes, the truth slowly pieced itself together in my mind. It was Laura, she had poisoned her mother and tried to poison me. Determined to find proof, I hired a private detective and handed over all the evidence I had, including the medical reports and my blood test results. 2 weeks dragged by with agonizing slowness until the detective came back with shocking news. Laura had burned through the fortune she inherited from her late husband and was drowning in debt. It became clear her motives were as toxic as the poison she favored. "This isn't just about inheritance," I told the detective, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "She's eliminating anyone who stands in her way. She could be targeting Ethan next." Armed with this new information, I knew I had to act fast to prevent further harm. I called Ethan, my voice trembling but firm. "Ethan, I have proof about Laura. We need to meet. You have to see this." His response was cold, dismissive. "You're crazy, Anna. I can't believe I ever trusted you." And with that, he blocked my number, cutting off any chance of further communication. Standing there, phone in hand, I felt a mix of rage and resolve wash over me. Despite everything that had happened, I knew I needed to confront Ethan and reveal Laura's malicious plans. Reluctantly, he let me into the house. The coolness inside was a stark contrast to the sweltering heat outside. Ethan was quiet, his face drawn and tired. There was a glass of lemonade on the table, condensation beating on the outside. "It's hot out there," he said, nodding towards the glass. "Here, have some lemonade." Thirsty and distracted by the tension, I took a few sips. Almost immediately, my stomach churned painfully, a sharp stab that doubled me over. "Ethan," I gasped, clutching my abdomen. "Where did this lemonade come from?" "It's just lemonade. Laura made it. What's wrong?" His brow furrowed, a mix of concern and confusion crossing his face. "The lemonade, it's poisoned," I managed to say between sharp breaths. "Laura's trying to kill us for the inheritance." Ethan's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "You're out of your mind, Anna. I'm tired of these crazy theories about Laura trying to kill someone." I was desperate, the pain overwhelming. "Please, Ethan, you have to believe me. Call 911. As I spoke, my vision began to blur, and I felt myself slipping towards the floor. The cold tiles were a harsh welcome as I hit them, semi-conscious, barely aware of my surroundings. Just then, Laura walked in, catching the tail end of our conversation. She looked from Ethan to me, lying helpless on the floor, and a smirk twisted her lips. "Really, Ethan, she's losing it. Making up stories even now," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Ethan, conflicted and overwhelmed, rushed to the kitchen to fetch a cold compress, leaving me at Laura's mercy. Kneeling beside me, Laura leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper. "This is the end for you. In a few hours, the thallium will finish its work, and then Ethan's next. Once he's gone, everything will be mine." Her words were the last thing I heard before darkness enveloped me, pulling me into a deep, silent void. I awoke in the sterile brightness of a hospital room, the beeping of machines by my bedside punctuating the quiet. My mind felt foggy, memories of the last few days tangled like a ball of knotted yarn. The sharp pain in my stomach had subsided, replaced by a dull ache that seemed to echo deeper, reaching beyond the physical. The nurse, seeing me stir, came over with a reassuring smile. "You're in the hospital," she explained. "You've been out for days, but you're safe now." "Did anyone come with me? My husband, Ethan?" My voice was hoarse, the words scratching their way out. She checked her notes, her expression neutral. "No, you were brought in by an ambulance alone. But your husband did call 911, even though there was some resistance, apparently." A doctor came in next, flipping through my chart with clinical detachment. "You're lucky to be alive. We managed to remove the thallium from your system in time. A few more hours and—" He didn't finish his sentence, but he didn't need to. As the reality of the situation settled in, I felt a mixture of relief and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I was saved, yes, but at what cost? Ethan's absence spoke volumes, and the hurt from it gnawed at me. Later, 2 police officers walked into the room. Their faces were stern, their notebooks ready. "We understand you took matters into your own hands when you suspected poisoning." That was risky. You should have come to us as soon as you suspected something. Shame washed over me. He was right. I had been so caught up in proving Laura's guilt, I hadn't considered the dangers of facing her alone. I know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I needed proof. I thought I could handle it. The other officer softened slightly. Well, your actions did lead to uncovering the truth. We've apprehended your sister-in-law. It turns out she did poison her husband and your mother-in-law with thallium. We exhumed their bodies and confirmed it. She's facing multiple charges now. Their words were a cold comfort. Justice might have been served, but the cost was etched deeply into my heart. The officers thanked me before leaving, their steps echoing down the hall long after they were out of sight. Recovery was slow, and with it came the realization that the next steps were mine alone to take. Ethan's absence had severed whatever ties remained, and as painful as it was clear that my path forward would not include him. The trial of my sister-in-law, Laura, dragged on for months. It was a grueling process, filled with legal complexities and emotional turmoil. Throughout it all, the courthouse was a cold place, echoing with the footsteps of those seeking justice and those dreading it. I hadn't seen Ethan since I left the hospital, not until the first day of the trial. He sat there, a stoic figure, clinging to a version of his sister that no longer existed in the eyes of the law. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution, Ethan refused to believe Laura's guilt. He whispered fiercely during recess, "You're wrong about her. The tests, the accusations, they're all mistakes. Laura's an angel, not a monster." I looked into his eyes, searching for the man I once loved, but found only a stranger. "How can you still say that after everything? Look at the evidence." He shook his head, dismissive and cold. "It's all circumstantial. You just want revenge on her, that's all this is." The trial continued, witnesses came and went, experts testified about the lethal levels of thallium found in the bodies, and slowly, the truth began to unfold before everyone in that courtroom. Laura sat there, mostly impassive, until the pressure of the undeniable evidence reached a breaking point. On the final day, when confronted with a particularly damning piece of evidence, Laura's composure cracked. With a cruel smile, she confessed, her voice chilling the room. "Yes, I did it. I poisoned them all, my husband, my mother, and I tried to kill Anna and Ethan too. All for the property, all for a life I deserved." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the shock palpable in the air. Ethan's face drained of color as he turned to look at me, the realization of his sister's true nature finally dawning on him. Laura was found guilty of double premeditated murder and attempted murder. The judge handed down a life sentence, ensuring she would spend her remaining days behind bars. Additionally, all her assets were seized and awarded to me as compensation for the immense physical and emotional harm she had caused. After the verdict, Ethan approached me outside the courtroom. His eyes were red, his voice shaky. "Anna, I'm so sorry. I was blind. Please, can we start over? Can we try again?" The pain of his betrayal, once sharp and biting, had settled into a dull, constant ache. I looked at him, really looked at him, and knew that too much had passed between us, too much had been broken. "No, Ethan. I can't. It's over." He reached out, but I stepped back, my decision firm. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." Leaving the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, not because I enjoyed the outcome, but because it was finally over. The battle was done, and justice, though it came at a steep price, was served. My recovery was slow, a process of rebuilding what Laura had tried to destroy. Physically, the poison had left its mark, and emotionally, the scars ran even deeper. I underwent treatment, attended therapy, and slowly pieced my life back together in a new apartment, far from the house that once promised a shared future with Ethan. Now, living alone, I work on forgetting, on healing. Some days are harder than others, the memories of betrayal and poison haunting me like ghosts of a past life. But each morning, I wake up and remind myself that I survived, that I am free from the web of deceit that once threatened to claim my life.